Good afternoon and welcome to London Live Debate with Reya El-Salahi. This is the show that takes a deeper look at the stories making headlines in the capital and the issues at the heart of life in the city. Tonight, the question up for debate: should we celebrate Black History Month? October marks its 30th anniversary with hundreds of events planned across the capital. But is it fair to devote an entire month to one of the capital's many ethnic groups over another? Well, joining me to share their thoughts on this, a panel of straight-talking, opinionated Londoners. First up, it's the self-styled rebel with a cause, the head of London youth charity, the Foyer Federation, Tokunbo Ajasa-Oluwa. Next, from a career in journalism and stand-up comedy to tackling racism as the founder of the Everyday Bigotry project, it's Shaista Aziz. And rounding up the trio, a man on a mission to get school children clued up when it comes to politics, the director of Model Westminster, Grant Fisher. Right, let's get straight into the chat. Tokunbo, should we celebrate Black History Month?
Yes, we should. It's important that a community that has played a significant role in the history of this nation is acknowledged, understood, and I feel that a month where we get a chance to amplify the existence of that community is crucial, because the challenges around racism, ignorance are still rife in society. My argument would be there are components of what we see in Black History Month that should be consistent throughout the year and not just be identified within a month. So yes, I definitely do think we should celebrate Black History Month.
I can see heads nodding. Shaista, what do you think about celebrating Black History Month? Should we continue to celebrate this month?
We absolutely should. Just to be very clear, Black History Month is British history as well. Black people are part of this country. They've contributed to this country from when it was created. And I think the issue here is that Black people's contribution to Britain is pretty much erased. It's not taught in schools, it's not taught in history books, it's not really relevant in terms of people's understanding. We're in London. If you walk around London, you'd be hard pushed to really understand the contribution that Black people have made to this great city. And this is why we need Black History Month. It's sad that 30 years on we still need it, but frankly, if you look at the state of the UK, we're in a very polarised country. If you look at what's happening in Europe, if you look at what's happening in the US, race is an issue that is at the heart of everything, but nobody really wants to talk about it.
Grant, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I think we should absolutely celebrate Black History Month. So one of the things I think about is, and this is in terms of my work with young people, is teaching them about campaigning and campaigning for things that are important to them. So I think about it from that point of view, and I think designating a month to campaign for something that is important is a great way to focus attention on an important issue. So things that I will be thinking through, and we'll be going to chat about these, are since Black History Month started 30 years ago, what was it trying to do? Has it achieved what it's trying to do? And what are the next steps?
Okay. Now, to mark Black History Month, Theresa May has vowed to release the findings of the most extensive research of its kind into racial inequality ever taken. Have a look at this.
One of the first things I did when I became Prime Minister was to commission a racial disparity audit across the public sector, because I felt that there were areas, there were communities who perhaps weren't seeing the same treatment from the public sector as others. And the results will be published in full next week, and it makes uncomfortable reading.
Now, the findings of the race disparity audit will be published on Tuesday, the 10th of October, with early data released by Number 10 suggesting stark disparities in everything from healthcare, education, employment and the criminal justice system, depending on your colour of your skin. You heard the Prime Minister there say the research is set to reveal the uncomfortable truths about racial inequality in Britain. So, Shaista, is the criticism of Black History Month based on how uncomfortable we feel as a society talking about race?
Well, I think the criticism is based on so-called political correctness and this belief that everything is okay and that Black people have got it good now and that, you know, racism is something of the past. I mean, I find it amazing that Theresa May is announcing yet another, you know, thorough investigation into the state of race relations. If we just look at Grenfell Tower alone, I think that really very vividly shows the stark inequalities in the City of London alone. And the issues of race, of course, are very pertinent there. The fact of the matter is we are deeply uncomfortable when it comes to talking about race. There's a lot of outrage in this country about being called a racist and very little outrage about racism.
Grant, do you feel uncomfortable talking about race?
To a certain extent, at times I do. as someone who hasn't really, I suppose, suffered from racism, to be frank. It's an area that I'm sometimes weary about treading into. So for that reason, I suppose you could say I feel nervous, not so much uncomfortable, maybe nervous.
You physically look almost uncomfortable just
Do I?
talking about this. Is there a sense, Tokunbo, that there is this real sense of being uncomfortable? The Prime Minister described it as the uncomfortable truths of racial inequality. Do you sympathise with that sense of people feeling uncomfortable talking about this?
I don't think sympathising is the word that comes to mind for me. I mean, the reality is, let's say, for example, with Uber making the news, I saw on my social media kind of outlet, I noticed a number of black males talking about the challenge of getting a taxi now if they're relying on black taxis to get picked up, because a number of black males have experienced firsthand of being ignored by taxi drivers. So there is a reality check that is inconvenient, uncomfortable, but it's reality. So for me, it's not about how comfortable it feels. It's about, if we're talking about making positive social change, what does that look like? And what are the components that we need to implement to see that change, where 30 years from now, when we're celebrating black history, we can actually talk about the progress that has been made.
And I think that starts with having truthful conversations about race. So Theresa May is talking in a way that she's very detached from the issue of race. This is a woman who, as Home Secretary, had vans being driven around London with "Go Home" posters. This is a government that is overseeing the highest rates of hate crime in this country, recorded hate crime, post-Brexit. She's a Prime Minister while this is going on. This is a woman who's Prime Minister while Donald Trump is attacking our elected Mayor of London based on his identity post-terrorist attacks in London. This is a reality of what's going on in relation to race in this country, while Theresa May is our Prime Minister. And I think she needs to sort of take responsibility for that, rather than say that it would be uncomfortable truths or surprising. This is not surprising, this is damning, actually.
So a race audit released in Black History Month is not the right move?
A race audit is important, it's very important if it's going to actually move things forward. A couple of weeks ago, we had an audit from the Social Mobility Commission looking at the horrific levels of discrimination that young British Muslims are facing in this country. The evidence is there for everyone to see. If you talk to any young person or any person who's different, who's deemed to be other in this country, especially post-Brexit, they will tell you about the reality that they're facing in terms of racism. There are people that have not faced racism in 30, 40 years that are facing open bigotry in our country. This has all been documented. There's a catalogue of reported hate crimes that are out there for everyone to see. So none of this is surprising. I think that what we need to now do is really have a very honest discussion about what we want to do to tackle structural racism in this country. This has been going on for generations. We need to deal with it.
And where do you think that conversation could start?
It needs to start at government.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, what we're seeing a normalisation of racism in our political rhetoric, and this is coming from the top and it's seeping all the way down to the bottom. And so we need to make sure that our representatives, our democratically elected representatives, start taking responsibility for what's going on. And beyond that, discussions need to take place in newsrooms, discussions need to take place at board level. Racism is structural, discrimination is structural. It doesn't happen by accident. It's been going on for a very long time. And while good people, I think, are trying to move this forward, there needs to be more honesty. And I think the problem is defensiveness kicks in, and people find it quite difficult to talk about this. But we need to go beyond talking. We need action. So
does that mean you think Black History Month has not worked?
Black History Month has worked. Black History Month is not there to dismantle structural racism. That was not the point of Black History Month. Black History Month is a celebration of black people. Frankly, black people are facing unprecedented levels of racism and discrimination. David Lammy's report has shown that if you look at the population of the United Kingdom, there are more black men in prison than there are in the US. If you look at the population size of the UK, this is absolutely damning, and we have to get to the bottom of it. And we're not going to get to the bottom of it through 1 month of celebrating black history, but a month of celebrating black history is actually for black people as well, to celebrate their humanity, their brilliance, their excellence. And this is something that you can see on Twitter, you can see on social media platforms, that young black people in particular are embracing. And it's about changing the narrative.
But I think it's also about educating society at large, particularly when you're talking about a multicultural city like London. I mean, I used to run a social enterprise that was based in Tottenham, and on Tottenham High Road, I remember reading a statistic that there was over 300 languages that were spoken, you know, through the length of Tottenham High Road. So it's not about it being a celebration for one particular community. It's actually about educating all aspects of society about what the contribution looks like. And in conjunction with that, it's then going back to that inconvenient or uncomfortable truth about what history actually looks like. Let's look at the facts of what built this great city that we are so proud of. It's about understanding what roles were played in building that.
We'll continue this discussion in just a moment. Afraid to say it is time for a short break now, but do stay with us for more from London Live Debate after the ads. Welcome back to London Live Debate. I'm Reya El-Salahi, and tonight the question up for discussion: should we celebrate Black History Month? The annual event kicked off this week with a nod from Sadiq Khan to the part people of African and Caribbean heritage have played in shaping the capital.
Black History Month gives us an opportunity to celebrate the huge contribution Black people have made and continue to make. Earlier this year, I was proud to attend the unveiling of the UK's first war memorial for African and Caribbean soldiers at Windrush Square in Brixton. We all owe a huge debt to those brave service men and women who fought for us, helping to protect the freedoms we enjoy today. This history is not simply a black story, but a British story, and a London one too. So let's use this year's Black History Month as a great opportunity for us all not only to reflect on our past and how far we've come, but to celebrate and look forward to the next exciting chapter of Black history.
Now, among the dozens of comments posted online in response to the Mayor's message, there was one reoccurring question. Why isn't there a celebration for White History Month? Tokunbo, before the break, we were talking about uncomfortable truths. Is this an example of an uncomfortable truth? Why isn't there a White History Month? It
is an uncomfortable truth because I can remember growing up in East London, East End of London in the 80s, 90s, and learning Chaucer, learning about Henry VIII, learning about Saxons. I learned so much about the white British experience, and yet my heritage was totally ignored. Even the opportunity to learn languages that reflect my community never existed in my school. So the reality is the dominant status quo is the white experience. And I don't necessarily have an issue with that because the premise is it's about equality. So I'm not saying it's either or, it's about celebrating the mix that we have in London, and we don't do that.
Shaista, uncomfortable truths, a White History Month. People will say, if we focus on one ethnic group in London, 45% based on the last census of this capital is made up of white British. Why not have a month dedicated to them?
Well, every day of the week is dedicated to that. And this is, I mean, to be honest, this is a false dichotomy, really. The problem is that, as I said, Black contributions to this country are mostly erased. When I was learning about history in school, I learnt about the width of the train tracks during the Industrial Revolution, but I never learnt about the British Empire. And one of the reasons why post-Brexit there's such a manufactured panic in this country about being British and what does it mean to be British and having British values and all these other things that are being thrown at us is because we simply do not know our history. We have no idea about how this country became so wealthy and where this country got its wealth from and who this country, who made this country, which is immigrants. White people, immigrants, everyone made this country, but we simply don't know anything about it because it's not taught in schools. There is no attempt to teach British history, and this is why I think that there is comments like this about, the need to celebrate white people and white history. The fact of the matter is we need to really understand our past to then be able to understand why we are where we are.
Grant, your work with Model Westminster is teaching school children about politics, trying to get them engaged with this system. What do they tell you about events like Black History Month? Are they engaged with it if they're not from African or Caribbean heritage?
To be honest, it hasn't actually come up in terms of what we've covered. I'm more about teaching sort of the techniques that would give them sort of like the skills and knowledge to campaign around the things they're wanting to campaign around. So the things we cover aren't necessarily related specifically to issues like Black History Month, but maybe this is something I need to start thinking about covering. I mean, just coming onto your points, I grew up with a curriculum that was largely focused on white Western history and very little coverage of the role that Black people or other groups played. So I think things that highlight that are actually very important.
Some argue that that's the point of Black History Month. We're 30 years along the line. If young people don't feel that they're being taught that range of history now, is Black History Month failing?
I think that's the expectation of being able to pack in that kind of demand in 30 days is unrealistic. So I don't see Black History Month as the educational beam for the Black experience. That's something that has to be embedded within the fabric of our society right throughout the year. What I see the month doing is it's an amplification of celebrating a community that's played a significant role in this society. Two different things.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's part of a number of ways through which to highlight this particular issue. So it wouldn't be the whole sort of solution, but it's part of a number of ways to highlight something that's very important to raise.
Is there a sense that it's preaching to the preached, that you're reaching out to audiences that perhaps are already aware, already engaged with this sort of history? Actually, maybe Black History Month should be aimed at people that know nothing about it.
Well, I think that Black History Month is important on many levels, and one level is for Black people. I'm part of a closed Facebook group, and on the first day of Black History Month, this Facebook group focuses on issues around race. The entire day was dedicated to our Black colleagues, Black members of this Facebook page, to post whatever they wanted, photographs, stories, current news stories about their race and what it means to be Black in Britain. So to be honest, this Black History Month isn't about everybody else, it's also about Black people, and it's just 30 days, that's all it is. It's an opportunity, as you're saying, to amplify stories, to amplify narratives that don't ever really get a look in. It's like, the history of this country, as I said, it's whitewashed. It's not the job of Black History Month to change the thinking of people. It's the job of our government and institutions to really start actually doing the proper work that they need to be doing to deal with structural racism in this country. And that includes decolonising our education system so we actually know what our history is. And by people knowing what their history is, that's how they get a sense of belonging. That's how they get a sense of pride. And that's how they understand the contribution that their families and their ancestors have made to our country.
31 days to celebrate Black history. That is one of the main criticisms of this month. If we set aside a month, you're almost alleviating the need to talk about it the rest of the year. Is that a fair criticism?
Well, yes, in a sense, because I think the reality is society needs to make a decision about the investment it wants to make to see positive change. So if we're talking about using this month as an opportunity to amplify the contributions of a community, then what are we doing for the rest of the year? What does that look like? For example, if you look at the stats about the proportion of African children in the capital, I don't know one school that teaches an African language, whether it's a GCSE option or not. I don't know one school that does that. So my point is that we need to make serious investment in embedding the Black experience within the fabric of our society, rather than just seeing it potentially as a tokenistic gesture that lasts for the period of October.
It is criticised as being polarising. Grant, do you feel like Black History Month's for you?
Yes, I do, actually, to be honest. And I have to say, I wasn't actually aware in my higher consciousness, I've, focusing on charity stuff, focusing on other things. To be honest, I wasn't aware that Black History Month was coming up. But when I was learning about it and coming on this show, I thought to myself, okay, there's more work that needs to be done around this. So I would definitely think it's important, and I would definitely think it's valid. But I would just say, I wonder what next steps need to be taken, because if it's continuing maybe every sort of year, it's become a fixture of the calendar, is there a way that we need to up this to the next level if things are still not getting the change that we're looking for?
It's something that, Shaista, you touched on at the start of the show. You said it was sad that we're still celebrating Black History Month. Why?
Well, because it just shows you the need to show, as I said earlier, the humanity of black people, the contribution black people have made. I mean, this should be an everyday part of the everyday narrative of our country, part of the everyday story of our country. It's not there, and it's 2017, and one has to ask, why isn't it there? Why is it that even now, when I was growing up as a kid, if I saw someone who looked vaguely like me or my mum or my dad on television, we'd all get very, very excited. You know, it's just a couple of weeks ago that Riz Ahmed won an Emmy. Last year, Moonlight was the first film with an all African-American cast that won an Oscar, and it goes on and it goes on. We are still breaking these firsts, and we have to ask, why is this still happening? And it's happening because our experiences, our lived experiences, are not part of the daily reality in terms of, you know, how this country functions, and that needs to change. I mean, we just heard from the Mayor of London earlier, Sadiq Khan, and the fact this memorial has only occurred now, that tells you everything. It really does. And so I think Black History Month should be celebrated. I'm proud it's here. I'm proud of the, you know, the contribution that my black brothers and sisters continue to make to this country. And I think it's important that we recognise it. But we need to make this an everyday occurrence. It shouldn't be just 1 month of the year.
We are almost running out of time, but let me just briefly ask you all, in 30 years' time, if we are still having this conversation, if Black History Month is still taking place, will it be a point to celebrate or commiserate, Grant?
Good question. I think that depends on what it's trying to achieve. If it's trying to really, I mean, if the achievements are it's trying to embed black history into the curriculum or things like that, or bring itself out of existence, then there may be a case for saying it's a shame that we're still having to celebrate and having to raise this as an awareness. But I don't know, I still think it's a good idea, irrespective. I still think it's worthwhile doing.
A good or bad thing?
I think it'll be fine as a celebration. If we've seen significant developments in equality in society, that for me will be the marker between the two.
And Shaista, just very briefly, a good thing or a bad thing in 30 years' time if we're still celebrating?
I agree with both my colleagues here. It's a good thing, but we need real change. We can't wait another 30 years for real change.
On that point, I'm afraid to say we are out of time, but many thanks to tonight's panel, Tokunbo, Ajasa-Oluwa, Shaista, Aziz and Grant Fisher for being brilliant panellists. London Live Debate returns same time, same place in a fortnight on Sunday the 22nd of October. Tune in from 5:30. Stay with us. Up next, it's London Live News. Thanks for watching and have a great evening.